Hello, I never thought I would sit here and say this out loud, but if you're watching this right now, I believe it's not by accident. There was a time when I walked in darkness, not metaphorically but deliberately. I was part of something hidden, something powerful, something that thrived on silence. And today, I'm breaking that silence. I used to belong to a circle, a financial covenant network that most people don't even know exists. We didn't just target people randomly. We targeted those with potential, those who were meant to rise, to prosper, to build generational wealth. And our assignment was simple: delay them, drain them, and keep them stuck. You might be wondering, how is that even possible? I asked the same question when I first entered, but what I learned shook me. These covenants are not always made knowingly. Sometimes they are inherited. Sometimes they are spoken over you. Sometimes they are activated through patterns, debt cycles, constant losses, missed opportunities that make no logical sense. I remember sitting in a dim room, candles flickering, hearing names being called, people we had never met, yet we had access to their financial flow. Their breakthroughs were monitored, their promotions were delayed, their businesses collapsed just when success was within reach. And the most terrifying part? Many of them were praying, but nothing was changing. Back then, I believed we were powerful. I believed we controlled outcomes, but I didn't realize something. There were moments when certain names would come up, and suddenly everything would stop. The atmosphere would shift, the rituals would fail, and there was only one reason for it. Those people were using something we feared more than anything.
Not just reading them, but declaring them with authority.
I didn't understand it at first. How could ancient words disrupt what we were doing? But I saw it over and over again. Whenever someone aligned their faith with specific psalms, our access would be cut off. It was like a legal contract being revoked in the spirit. There was one night I will never forget. A name came up, a man who had been struggling financially for years. Everything we placed against him had worked perfectly until suddenly it didn't. Within weeks, his situation began to change. Doors opened, opportunities came, and we couldn't touch him anymore. I asked my superior, what happened? And I will never forget the answer. He found the Psalms that break agreements. That sentence haunted me because for the first time I realized what we were doing wasn't absolute. There was a higher authority, a greater power, and it could undo everything we had built. That's when the cracks began to form in my belief. I started secretly studying these Psalms, not out of faith, but out of curiosity. I wanted to understand what made them so dangerous to us. And what I discovered changed everything. These were the prayers. They were legal declarations. They spoke directly against hidden covenants. They revoked permissions. They dismantled spiritual agreements that had been in place for years, even generations. And today, I'm going to share them with you. Because if you're watching this, there's a reason. Maybe you've been working hard, but nothing is moving. Maybe money comes, but never stays. Maybe every time you get close to breakthrough, something pulls you back. That's not always coincidence. Sometimes it's a covenant. But the good news is covenants can be broken, spirits. And in the next part, I'm going to reveal the first psalm that we feared the most, the one that completely shuts down financial manipulation at its root. Stay with me because what you're about to hear might change everything. I remember the first time I heard it being spoken, not in a church, not in a place of worship, but inside a circle that was meant to control outcomes. The atmosphere was tense, heavier than usual. We had gathered to enforce a financial delay on someone whose name had come up repeatedly, someone who, according to our system, should have remained stuck. But something was wrong. Every attempt we made had begun to fail. There was agitation among the members, confusion, even fear, that was rare. We were trained to believe we had control, that once a covenant was in place, it held power unless reinforced or replaced. But this situation was different. Something was pushing back, something we couldn't override. And then one of the elders spoke. The room went silent. I didn't understand why a single psalm could create such a reaction. But the way they said it, it wasn't frustration, it was recognition, almost like encountering a force we had learned to avoid. That was the first time I heard about Psalm 23 in this context. Yes, the one most people think is gentle, comforting, something recited at funerals or quiet moments. But what I learned is that we had completely misunderstood its nature, or rather, we had underestimated it. My meaning is it is a statement of ownership. Then what you want? That line alone, it cancels lack. It establishes provision as a right, not a request. And in the realm where covenants operate, that distinction matters. When someone speaks from authority instead of desperation, it disrupts every agreement built on scarcity. Deju, I began to study it more closely, secretly carefully. Each line carried something deeper than I had ever imagined. He makes me lie down in green pastures. This wasn't just imagery, it was positioning. It meant being placed in a state of rest where provision already exists. And if someone is divinely positioned, it becomes nearly impossible to enforce struggle against them. He leads me beside still waters.
Stillness means stability. No chaos, no loss, no unexpected drain. That line alone began to undo patterns we tried to create, cycles of sudden expenses, financial confusion, instability that keeps people from building anything lasting.
But it was the next part, it's the one that truly shook everything. He restores my soul. Restoration isn't just emotional. It includes everything that has been taken, delayed, or diminished. When someone declares restoration with belief, it triggers recovery. And recovery is something we could never fully block, only delay. I remember testing it myself, quietly, when no one was around. At first, I felt nothing, just words, but I kept repeating it, not out of faith, but out of curiosity. And slowly, something shifted.
Are not around me at first, but within me.
The fear I had lived with for years began to weaken. The control that system had over my thoughts started loosening. And that's when I realized something dangerous. Dangerous to the system I was part of. These Psalms didn't just break external covenants, they broke internal agreements too. The ones you don't even realize you've made. Believing you'll always struggle, always lack, always stay behind. And then came the line we feared the most. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Do you understand what that means? It means elevation in full view of opposition, not hidden, not delayed, not partial. It means being blessed in a way that cannot be denied or reversed by those watching. That line made everything we did visible as powerless. Because if someone is being elevated openly despite opposition, then the covenant has already been broken. I saw it happen, not once, but multiple times. People we had marked as contained, suddenly rising, advancing, succeeding beyond expectation, and every time we investigated, the same pattern appeared. They were declaring this psalm, not casually, but consistently, with belief, with authority. That's when fear entered the system I was part of. Because something simple, something accessible to anyone, was dismantling something we thought was complex and untouchable. And now I'm telling you this, not to scare you, but to show you something important. You don't need to understand every hidden system. You just need to know what breaks it. And Psalm 23, when declared with intention, begins that process. But it doesn't stop there, because there is another psalm, one that doesn't just restore and protect, but actively confronts and destroys the forces behind these covenants. In the next part, I will reveal the second psalm, the one we were instructed to avoid at all costs, because once it is activated, it doesn't just weaken the system. It is written with you. Play with me. There was a rule, one that wasn't written down, but everyone in that circle understood it without needing to be told twice. There were certain words we were not allowed to provoke, certain declarations we were trained to avoid hearing, not because they were rare, but because when they were spoken with authority, they didn't just interfere, they confronted. And confrontation was something our system could not comfortably withstand. I remember one particular assignment. A man had been marked for containment for years. His finances were unpredictable, just enough to survive, never enough to expand. Every attempt he made to grow was quietly disrupted. Opportunities collapsed at the last moment. Partnerships failed without clear reason. From the outside, it looked like bad luck, but we knew it wasn't. Everything was proceeding as expected until one week everything reversed. Not gradually, not subtly, it was immediate. The patterns broke, the delays stopped working, the resistance we applied didn't hold. It was as if something had stepped in and challenged every layer of control we had established. The room was restless that night. Questions were being asked, calculations rechecked. Nothing made sense within the system we relied on. Someone said it. He started declaring Psalm 35. The reaction was instant, not panic, but something very close to it. Because Psalm 35 was never treated as ordinary where I came from. It wasn't categorized with comfort or reflection. It was classified as confrontation, direct, aggressive, and legally disruptive. I didn't understand it at the time, so later I went and read it for myself. The opening line alone explains everything. With those who contend with me, fight against those who fight against me. This is not a passive prayer. This is a legal summons. It calls for divine intervention, not as support, but as active defense and engagement. It shifts the responsibility from the person to a higher authority. And when that happens, the entire structure of hidden opposition begins to destabilize. Because now it's no longer human effort versus resistance. It becomes something else entirely. As I read further, I began to see why we avoided it. First, take up shield and armor, arise and come to my aid. That line invokes protection, but not just protection. It calls for movement, action, engagement. It doesn't allow opposition to remain unchallenged. Exposure is a threat. Then came the part that truly unsettled me. May those who seek my life be disgraced and put to shame. There is a reversal happening here. Everything that was intended for harm is being redirected, not ignored, not tolerated, reversed. That kind of declaration, it creates consequences, and consequences were something our system tried to avoid at all costs. Only via started noticing a pattern. Whenever someone consistently declared this psalm, not emotionally, not out of fear, but with clarity and authority, things began to shift rapidly. Hidden interference would surface. Unexpected truth would come out.
Situations that were manipulated behind the scenes would collapse under their own weight.
Here, the Sam was spilling everything into the light. And that's when I realized something critical. Me. Dark systems rely on two things: agreement and concealment.
So beautiful, disrespectful.
It removes silent agreement by confronting what was hidden, and it removes concealment by calling for exposure. That combination is devastating to anything operating in secrecy. I remember trying to ignore what I was discovering. It challenged everything I had accepted as truth, but the evidence was consistent. It didn't matter who the person was, where they came from, or how long they had been struggling. When they engaged with this psalm intentionally, something shifted. My name is Ama, and I was born in Accra, Ghana. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Doubt, not in the psalm, but in everything I had been part of. Because if words like these could dismantle systems we believed were powerful, then maybe those systems were never as absolute as we thought. Maybe they only held power as long as they were unchallenged. And that realization changed me because it meant something simple, something accessible, something ancient had the authority to break what we had spent years building. But there was still one more, one Sam we rarely spoke about, not because it was unknown, but because it was final, the one that didn't just restore, didn't just confront, but completely severs the root of every hidden agreement tied to loss, delay, and limitation. In the next part, I will share that final psalm, the one we feared the most. One that once activated leaves nothing behind. Stay with me. There are things I hesitated to speak about even after I left that life, not because they still had power over me, but because I understood the weight of them. Some knowledge doesn't just inform you, it confronts you, it demands a decision. And what I'm about to share now is one of those things. Because this final psalm, it wasn't just avoided, it was respected. Not in a good way, but in the way you respect something that can completely dismantle everything you've built. I remember the first time I heard it mentioned, not spoken loudly, not declared, but whispered, almost like a warning. We were being instructed on how to maintain certain financial constraints over individuals who had begun to show signs of breaking free. And then one of the senior members said something that stayed with me. If they start using Psalm 91 consistently, withdraw, withdraw. That word was never used lightly. It meant disengage. It meant do not attempt interference. It meant whatever was covering that person was beyond what we were permitted to challenge. At the time, I didn't understand why. So later, I went to read it. And from the very first line, I felt something different. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. This isn't just a statement, it's positioning. It describes someone who is not just protected, but hidden within a covering that cannot be penetrated by external forces. It's not about temporary defense, it's about residence, dwelling, remaining.
All times I in that place, my breath will be infinite net beneath. Access is denied.
Unverkleinig. As I continued reading, it became clear why this psalm was treated the way it was.
I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress.
A refuge is where you go for safety. A fortress is where attacks fail. When someone declares both, they are not asking for protection, they are affirming it. And in the realm where covenants operate, affirmation carries authority. Then came the lines that made everything undeniable. Surely he shall deliver you from the snare and from the deadly pestilence. The word snare caught my attention immediately, because that's exactly what many financial covenants are. Hidden traps, invisible patterns, cycles that keep repeating without explanation, situations designed to look natural, but engineered to limit. And here this psalm was directly addressing them.
Not negotiating.
Not acknowledge, delivering. I began to understand why we were told to withdraw. This wasn't just breaking agreements. The kiro, this aska. There's a difference.
Yeah.
And Psalm 23 restores. Psalm 35 confronts. One, but Psalm 91 it seals. It establishes a level of covering where interference is no longer possible. I tested it the same way I had tested the others, quietly, cautiously. But this time the effect was immediate, not externally, but internally. There was a sense of separation, like something that had been attached was no longer connected. And that's when I realized something that changed everything for me. Not all battles are meant to be fought repeatedly. Some are meant to be ended completely. And this psalm carries that finality. He shall give his angels charge over you. That line alone introduces something we could never override. Divine enforcement. Tut molic, not symbolic, not passive,
Active.
assigned. When someone consistently declares this psalm, they are not just speaking words, they are aligning themselves with a structure that operates beyond human systems, beyond hidden agreements, beyond manipulation. And once that alignment is established, there is nothing left to access, nothing left to delay, nothing left to drain.
Such individuals we had tracked for years suddenly become unreachable, not physically, but spiritually, financially, situationally.
Everything we relied on stopped working, not weakened, stopped, and every single time the pattern was the same. They had entered what this psalm described.
The secret place.
That realization, it broke something in me. Mikazos on shoulder that what I had been part of was not ultimate, it was conditional, limited, dependent on silence, ignorance, and lack of resistance. But these psalms, they remove all three. And that's why I'm telling you this now. Not to create fear, not to give you clarity. Because if you've been experiencing patterns that don't make sense, delays that feel unnatural, losses that repeat without reason, you don't have to stay in that cycle.
There is a way out.
And it's not complicated.
But it is intentional.
In the final part, I'm going to show you exactly how to use these 3 psalms together. Not just to pray, but to break every hidden financial covenant and step into complete freedom. Stay with me. This is where everything comes together. If you've stayed with me this far, then I don't believe it's slutionist, because everything I've shared up until now was not just information, it was preparation. Preparation for this moment where you don't just listen, but decide. Because knowing something is powerful, but applying it is what changes everything. I spent years inside a system that depended on one thing more than anything else: silence. Silence from those who didn't understand what was happening to them. Silence from those who felt something was wrong but couldn't explain it. And most of all, silence from those who had authority but didn't know how to use it. These psalms break that silence, but they only work when they are engaged with intention, not fear, not desperation. I learned that the hard way. When I first began speaking them, nothing seemed to change externally, and I almost stopped. But what I didn't realize was something deeper was already shifting. The agreements I had unknowingly aligned with were being challenged. And once a covenant is challenged consistently, it begins to weaken. It breaks. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you now, how to use these 3 psalms together in a way that disrupts, confronts, and completely severs every hidden financial agreement operating in your life. This is not a ritual.
This is alignment.
You begin with Psalm 23, not casually, but deliberately. You declare it as a statement of truth. You're not asking for provision, you're establishing it. Every line becomes a correction to anything that has told you that lack is your reality. You speak it until your mindset shifts from hoping to knowing. That's where it starts. Then you move to Psalm 35. This is where confrontation happens. You are no longer just restoring what was lost. You are addressing what caused the loss. You are calling for every hidden interference to be exposed and reversed. You are no longer passive. You are engaged. And this part requires consistency. So confrontation creates resistance before it creates release. But if you stay with it, things begin to surface. Patterns break. Situations shift. What was hidden becomes visible. And then you seal it with Psalm 91. This is where everything changes. You are no longer just breaking agreements. You are stepping into a position where new ones cannot be formed. You are establishing a covering that removes access completely, not temporarily, permanently. This is not about repeating words.
It's about understanding what you are declaring.
Because when understanding meets consistency, authority is activated. I've seen people go from years of struggle to sudden clarity, from constant loss to stability, from frustration to momentum, not because something external suddenly appeared, but because something internal and spiritual. You shifted first. And once that shift happens, everything else follows. But let me be clear about something. This is not instant magic.
A realignment.
A breaking followed by a rebuilding. And it requires one thing above all else is
Consistency.
Not once.
so the Phrygians best.
but daily.
Because every time you declare these psalms, you are reinforcing a new reality, one where lack is not accepted, where interference is not tolerated, where access is denied to anything that was operating against you. And over time, that reality becomes your normal. I never thought I would be the one saying this. After everything I had seen, everything I had been part of, I believed those systems were unbreakable. But I was wrong. They only appear strong until they are confronted. They confront. They restore, but they seal. So if you've been searching for answers, if you've been trying to understand why things haven't been moving the way they should,
Start here.
not with fear, but with clarity, not with doubt, but with intention. And watch what begins to change. Because once you step out of agreement with limitation, you step into something else entirely. Called freedom. And that is something no system can take from you once it's established. This is my confession.
This is what I thought.
And this is what I now know to be true. What you do with it is your decision.